It was another day of nothing happening in Donald Trump's failed attempts to negotiate with Iran the day after he ignored his own self-imposed deadline on those negotiations. Of course, no one violates Trump deadlines more than Donald Trump, and so he simply made his deadline disappear yesterday in a public statement claiming that Iran negotiators were just begging him.
Let me ask you a straightforward question. If you started a war 53 days ago, spent billions of dollars, lost lives, drove up fuel prices across an entire country, and still had nothing to show for it at the negotiating table, what would you call that?
The Islamic Republic of Iran has welcomed dialogue and agreement and continues to do so. Breach of commitments, blockade, and threats are main obstacles to genuine negotiations. World sees your endless hypocritical rhetoric and contradiction between claims and actions. And so, as of day 53 of Donald Trump's war, all of the explosions and death that Donald Trump has caused in Iran, including the Tomahawk missile strike on a girls' school that killed hundreds of people.
Because there's a word for it, several actually, and none of them are flattering. That's where we are right now with Donald Trump's Iran policy, day 53, and the scorecard is essentially blank unless you count higher gas prices, a Supreme Court ruling against him, a Virginia election he's calling rigged, and a social media meltdown about tariff refunds.
In all of that, Donald Trump has accomplished nothing for the American people in his war and nothing for the world. But he has delivered higher fuel prices, and therefore higher prices on everything else that moves on trucks in this country. And instead of trying to come up with ways to help Americans survive, what he insists is only a temporary increase in the price of gas and other prices. Donald Trump spent the day on social media complaining about the United States Supreme Court.
That's not a presidency in action. That's a presidency in free fall. And today, we're going to walk through every single piece of it. Let's start with Iran, because this is the story that should be dominating every front page and every broadcast. Trump had set a deadline for negotiations, his own deadline, one he announced publicly. And then, when that deadline arrived and nothing had been resolved, no deal, no framework, no meaningful progress, he simply made the deadline disappear. Not through diplomatic language, not through a carefully worded statement from the State Department. He went on social media and claimed that Iranian negotiators were essentially begging him for more time, that they were pleading with him to extend the deadline so they could put together a reasonable proposal. Iran's government responded immediately and directly. Their statement said the Islamic Republic has welcomed dialogue and continues to do so, but that what stands in the way of genuine negotiations is a combination of broken commitments, an economic blockade, and open threats. Then came the line that should be pinned to the top of every newsfeed. The world sees your endless hypocritical rhetoric and the contradiction between your claims and your actions. Read that again. A foreign government is publicly calling out the President of the United States for saying one thing and doing another, and they're not wrong. On the same day Trump is claiming Iran desperately wants a deal, his administration is maintaining a blockade designed to strangle their economy. You cannot simultaneously offer a handshake and a chokehold and call it diplomacy. The world has noticed. The Iranian government has noticed, and they're saying so on the record. Meanwhile, the human cost of this conflict continues to accumulate. A Tomahawk missile strike hit a girls' school in Iran. Hundreds of people killed. That is not a footnote. That is not a talking point to be dismissed. That is a war crime allegation that deserves to be front and center in every conversation about this conflict. And while that reality sits on one side of the ledger, what sits on the other? What has the American public gotten in return for 53 days of war, billions of dollars in daily military expenditure, and rising prices on everything from fuel to groceries? Nothing. Nothing of substance. Not a signed agreement, not a verified concession, not a clear path to resolution. By the way, please leave your questions or comments in the comments section. I will answer each one individually as time permits. Also, I would be very happy if you liked the video and subscribed to my channel. Now let's continue. Now let's talk about the Supreme Court decision, because Trump's reaction to it tells you almost everything you need to know about where his head is right now. The court ruled that Trump's sweeping global tariffs were unconstitutional, which we covered in depth recently. The power to impose tariffs belongs to Congress under the Constitution. That is not a controversial legal interpretation. That is the text of the document. The ruling means that billions of dollars in tariffs collected from American businesses and consumers have to be refunded. We're talking about over $160 billion plus interest. And Trump's response? He called it unexplainable. Said that handing back $159 billion to people who've been ripping off our country makes no sense. But here's the critical piece of information he's either ignoring or genuinely doesn't understand. Those refunds don't go to foreign countries. They go to American companies. American businesses that imported goods and paid those tariffs right here on American soil when the shipments arrived. Walmart, Apple, Amazon, companies whose products fill the shelves that American consumers shop from every single day. These are the entities that paid into a tariff regime the Supreme Court just declared illegal, and they are legally entitled to their money back. But Trump's response wasn't to acknowledge that. His response was to make what can only be described as a thinly veiled threat. He said he would remember which companies chose not to apply for refunds. He'd remember. Let that sit with you. The President of the United States is telling major corporations that if they exercise their legal right to recover money that was illegally taken from them, there will be consequences, that he'll keep score, that he'll remember. Legal experts were quick to point out the problem on the other end of that pressure. If executives at Apple or Walmart or Amazon choose not to apply for those refunds because they're afraid of presidential retaliation, they are almost certainly violating their fiduciary duty to their shareholders. Shareholders can and likely will sue. Protecting company assets is a legal obligation, not a preference. So Trump is essentially putting corporate executives in an impossible position: face presidential wrath if you apply for your legal refund, or face shareholder lawsuits if you don't. That's not governing. That's coercion dressed up in business language. And then, and I genuinely want you to appreciate how staggering this is, in the middle of all of this, with an active military conflict ongoing, refund chaos unfolding in the business community, and Iran negotiations going nowhere, Donald Trump took time out of his day to announce the results of his personal investigation into a state election in Virginia. Virginia held a vote. Democrats won, backing a redistricting plan endorsed by Governor Abigail Spanberger. The plan, approved by Virginia voters directly, is projected to add roughly 4 more Democrats to the House of Representatives. Trump immediately declared the election rigged, said Republicans were winning all day long, which is a statement that reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how elections work. No votes are counted during the day, no one is keeping score until the polls close, and there is no mechanism by which anyone could know who was winning before a single ballot is tallied. He also called the referendum language unintelligible and deceptive, and then added, and I want to be precise here, that he is an extraordinarily brilliant person, and even he had no idea what the ballot was saying. Setting aside the self-description for a moment, the Virginia redistricting plan was put to a public vote. Every voter in the state had a say. Compare that to what happened in Texas, where Trump privately encouraged Republican lawmakers to push through a redistricting plan that no Texas voter ever got to weigh in on. The double standard isn't subtle. When voters approve something Trump likes, it's democracy. When they approve something he doesn't, it's rigged. And that Virginia outcome matters beyond the state's borders. Because if similar redistricting efforts succeed in California and Virginia, the downstream effect could be a Democratic majority in the House of Representatives, which, as we've covered extensively, would activate the impeachment articles that nearly 100 lawmakers have been building for months. Trump's fixation on Virginia isn't just frustration. It's fear of what a changed House majority would mean for his presidency. Now, there's a financial thread running through all of this that deserves serious attention, and it's one that a Senate hearing began pulling on this week. The relationship between the Trump family and the United Arab Emirates has been a subject of documented concern for some time. A $500 million investment from a UAE national security official into the Trump family's crypto venture, World Liberty Financial, right before the inauguration. A $2 billion investment in a stablecoin deal that effectively delivered $2 billion in liquidity to World Liberty at the same moment the U.S. government was relaxing export controls on high-end AI technology to UAE companies. The timing of those two things, loosened export controls and a $2 billion injection into a Trump family financial vehicle, is not something that can be waved away as coincidence. And now the UAE is reportedly seeking a swap line through the U.S. Exchange Stabilization Fund. We're talking about a country that has been pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into Trump family financial interests, now asking for a significant financial mechanism from the U.S. government. The overlap between the personal financial interests of the Trump family and the official policy decisions of the Trump administration is exactly the kind of corruption that congressional oversight was designed to investigate, and exactly the kind of investigation that would become possible under a Democratic House majority. Former Secretary of State John Kerry, who successfully negotiated the Iran nuclear agreement under which Iran pledged never to develop nuclear weapons, weighed in with a clear assessment this week. His position, stated plainly, the administration's approach to Iran has put the United States in a worse position than it was in before. The nuclear agreement was functioning. It had verification mechanisms. It had international buy-in. Trump tore it up. And the result, 53 days into an active military conflict, is a situation where the Straits of Hormuz, which Kerry noted have never been closed during any previous U.S.-Iran conflict, are now being discussed as a potential flashpoint. Fuel prices are climbing, and a genuine diplomatic resolution is nowhere in sight. Kerry's advice, offered publicly without being asked, take time, be deliberate, create conditions for serious negotiation rather than a cycle of threats and ultimatums that gives the other side no incentive to come to the table in good faith. It's the kind of measured, experienced counsel that seems entirely foreign to an administration governing primarily through social media posts and late-night Truth Social declarations. Here's the through line connecting everything we've covered today. A president who blows past his own deadlines and then claims the other side asked him to. A tariff regime struck down as unconstitutional, followed by threats against the American companies now legally entitled to refunds. A state election declared rigged within hours of the results, based on no investigation and no evidence. A financial relationship between the Trump family and a foreign government that is conducting business with the U.S. at the same time that government gets favorable policy treatment. And underneath all of it, 53 days of a war that has cost American taxpayers over $1 billion a day, resulted in civilian casualties, including children, produced no diplomatic breakthrough, and delivered nothing to the American people except higher prices on everything that moves by truck across this country. The Supreme Court has drawn a hard line on emergency powers. Congress is building a documented constitutional case. Virginia voters just shifted the redistricting map, and the midterms are coming. Day 53. The clock is running, and the room keeps getting smaller.